Okay, so I was sitting with my friends one day and they asked me, Stephanie, how do you record your podcast? And I said, with the Anchor app on my phone. And they were like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, it's that simple. It is absolutely free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone and your computer. And it will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. You can also make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership. And it's got everything you need to make a podcast in one place. They even have classes and stuff that you can listen to that will give you all kinds of good tips on what you need to do in order to make the best podcast. So if you want to do this, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's anchor.fm or download the free Anchor app to get started. Hey y'all, welcome to the 90th episode of the Hardy Wrestling Podcast with your girl Stephanie Hardy. This episode is going to be a little different. It's going to start with me talking to you and saying thank you for supporting the show for as long as you have, because I could not have done this without all of my supporters and all of my consistent listeners, people who are close to me and people who I've actually been happy to meet over the course of this journey and over the growth of the show, and people I've been able to talk to on the show who are, lovers of wrestling and professionals in wrestling who do nothing but encourage me and give me inspiring words to keep going and to never give up on myself, and on this sport, even in the hard times. And I hope that when you listen to this show, you find some solace and you find some chill place to go to love what it is that you love, or to learn about something that you may not have ever given a chance to before. And I hope that this show does serve as that, place for you to go whenever things get crazy. I know that stuff has been crazy this week in wrestling, with Big E's injury, and definitely with the passing of Scott Hall / Razor Ramon. He passed away Monday, and then there's been so much other influx of news. But in the midst of all of that, I hope that all of you are doing the very best that you can to live a good and healthy life, and to just be the very best that you can be, and to do the things that you want to do and you set out to do, and to follow your dreams, because you only have one life. So fill it with the people that you love, whether it be family or family that you've created, or friends that you've created, and all of the above. Just surround yourself with positive energy and positive influences, and do the very best that you can, and be the light in the world, because you only have one life. So I hope that you're doing the very best that you can with that one life, and just being awesome and knowing that you are awesome the way that you are. I'm learning that every day, and I hope that that this podcast, helps with that journey of where you are, along with wrestling stuff too, but also helps with life stuff as well. So much has happened in wrestling with the new WWE Performance class, and with Cody Rhodes possibly signing to WWE, like with that report that came out yesterday. And normally I would talk about it here in this space, but really I just wanted to use this opportunity to just say thank you. Just thank you to everyone who's just tried and given me words of encouragement, and given me, tips whenever I've been worried about a certain thing, or worried about a certain endeavor, or scared to do a certain thing. Just thank you to everyone who's had anything to do with the growth of this podcast, and it's only going to get greater from here. So here's to the 90 episodes, and here's to hopefully 90 more, depending on what life has in store, because it could have a lot. So I'm grateful for the doors that this podcast has opened, and life may surprise you. This podcast has shown me that life will surprise you, but you have to be able to take that winding road and continue to be the best that you can be on that winding road. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoy my interview with Miranda Morales. She's an amazing person who I'm happy to have had close to me during this wrestling journey, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. This is the Hardy Wrestling Podcast. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to this live interview on the Hardy Wrestling Podcast with your girl, Stephanie Hardy. And I am here with a very special guest, a very special friend that I love to talk wrestling with and work with. She is a podcast host, ring announcer, backstage interviewer, the whole 9 yards. She's just everything. Is Miss Miranda Morales. How you doing?
Hello, I'm doing great, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm doing fine, just sleepy, but we're here.
Yes.
We are here, and it's gonna get cracking, and we're gonna do it, okay?
Yes, we are. Absolutely. I'm with you on that. We were just talking about all the other things we have to do after this podcast, more podcasting, more things. But as you said, it's always great to talk wrestling with friends. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, because the first time I had you on, I believe it was my first or second season of the show. And this was when I was just, doing audio stuff. And now I got you on video.
Yes.
Evolution.
You are definitely like the podcast with the most. Like you've just, you're branching out everywhere. You're taking it to the next level. So I'm really excited to be on today when this new iteration on Videocast.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you on too. So we're going to get into a little bit of everything, but of course I want to start by first of all taking some time to send up respect and love and peace to the family of Scott Hall, because we did sadly lose him on this side, but he is gained his wings on the other side. And I just want to send my respect to him, because this is the first time I've been on my platform since it did take place. So I do want to just use this time to actually talk about, some of our favorite Scott Hall moments and just, remember his life right here and right now. So Miranda, do you have any favorite Scott Hall moments?
Yeah, well, I started watching wrestling in the late 90s, and so I will claim to be an Attitude Era child, forever. But to be honest, my very, very first segment or moment of watching wrestling in the 90s was actually WCW Monday Night Nitro. And at that point, this was, 98, where the NWO was huge. And I didn't really know the history of the NWO until going a few years back after that, or before that, really how it got started and how Scott Hall was so instrumental, not only in the NWO, but changing the face of wrestling in the 90s, both on the earlier end with the Razor Ramon character, and then on the latter end when he moved over to WCW and business-wise really changed the game. I always thought, as a younger kid, when I heard about the Razor Ramon character, I thought it was very corny. But I think because, again, I wasn't a kid watching Razor Ramon. I was more a teenager at the time when, again, because I kind of worked my way backwards in wrestling and thought, oh my God, Scott Hall was this guy? But in hindsight, and really watching his matches, really watching his character at that time, it was a perfect place for him and really defined the early 90s, part of that newer generation that the WWE really branded at the time. And for someone who can go from a much more maybe comical character, but also a great heel, to then you could see shades of that in Scott Hall, the person, when we saw him in WCW and in the NWO. He made being a bad guy cool and effortless. Everything he did was just very seamless, and the way that he interacted with the crowd and the chemistry he had in the ring with people made it so effortless. And that, again, that transition from maybe kind of corny and hokey to a true like bad, cool guy is probably the best that I've honestly seen in wrestling. And so as just someone who grew up watching wrestling in the 90s and having him contribute so much to it, it's very hard, I think, for us 90s fans to see someone pass like this. When wrestlers do pass away, maybe in generations before us, but I think there's a big group of wrestling fans now who did grow up watching Scott Hall and Razor Ramon. And, you know, though we have great memories, it's almost like when you do have someone that passes that is so attached to your youth, there's a piece of that youth that goes away with it.
Yeah, definitely. I felt the same way because it's just, I remember, watching in the 90s, just like you, even though I was, a little bit, um, like almost basically like 4 years old around the time all of the NWO stuff was going on in WCW, and my dad was watching it on WCW constantly all the time. And it's like, for as long as you could remember, it's like you have a lot of memories attached to the NWO. If you didn't see anybody else on WCW television, you always saw those three, and of course the other 2011 people who was with the NWO as well.
Yeah, when they expanded.
Yeah, they expanded for real across brands, across sports, across everything, right?
Sure,
so true. It was just a pretty, but it was, those three, who were part of such the iconic pillars of that, faction. And when you look back on history and you look at everything that he did even before that, you can tell that everything he did, he put his all into. Even though he did have some battles to deal with behind the scenes, he was still doing, whatever he could to give his knowledge to people in wrestling, and then also, and also just be a good friend to those who he loved. So I really appreciate his contribution to wrestling, even, now in later years where you saw clips of him, helping people who came through like the first few classes of NXT, like stuff like that. It's just, there's a lot of people who are going to hold on to whatever it is that he, taught them. So it makes my heart, hurt that he is no longer with us. But at the same time, he contributed so much that we do still have a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of memories, to hold on to for as long as we, continue on this side. And we send our prayers and our good vibes and, good juju to the family and friends of Scott Hall. So I just wanted to start by saying that. So now we're going to shift the focus, more so to you, because this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing this for. So you mentioned how you started watching, you kind of started watching wrestling in the 90s. So when did you decide that this was something that was going to be a part of your life, professionally?
Oh, wow. I guess I did decide, but I think it just also kind of like decided for me. I really took the big jump into getting into the other side of wrestling, more behind the stage aspects of it, back in 2017, which I had to think about now is actually hitting my, 2018, 19, 20, 22, so 4-year-ish anniversary in wrestling. And it was just a kind of a coincidence. At the time when I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there was an independent wrestling promotion there, Destiny Wrestling Organization, DWO, and they were doing a lot of outreach in the community as far as presence. They were at Albuquerque Comic-Con. They had even posted on their social media that they were looking for interns. And so to me, that was a moment where I said, okay, everything is triangulating. All these things are coming together. I'm still in love with professional wrestling. Here's a company that is actively, working, and they're looking for people. Like, why not? What do I have to lose? And so when I submitted my interest to them, I met with them and pretty much said, okay, let me know what you think and what you want me to do. And so that's how my career really started with them. And then I think when it really stuck was when I moved from Albuquerque to Phoenix. Because for a lot of people, when they move to a new state, that could be kind of a factor in whether they continue to work in independent wrestling or not. For some people, it can help their opportunities. For some people, there's limited opportunities. But I knew for me, I still wanted to keep doing this. So when I made the jump to Phoenix, I got connected with Arizona Wrestling Federation. And I think that's truly, honestly, when I knew this was going to be with me for a while, because I could have just said, okay, this was fun. And once I moved from Albuquerque, decided not to do it anymore. But I knew I wanted to keep announcing and interviewing. And I made the efforts to continue that in Arizona. And then everything just kind of flourished after that.
So basically, as you moved around, you sought after it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You sought after the opportunity.
Yeah.
Because in some cases, it takes a lot of people some time to sort of transition and find their way in a new place. But it seemed like for everywhere that you would move, you would literally like seek out opportunities to participate in wrestling because you knew that was it for you.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I would say probably just a few weeks after I moved to Arizona, and maybe a few months, but actually, yeah, maybe it's even like about a month after I moved, I was already, announcing for Arizona Wrestling Federation. So it was a pretty quick turnaround, but it was because I did plant seeds before I moved. And I was very fortunate that people that I knew and recognized in New Mexico, who worked in New Mexico, were based out of Arizona. So I think that helped too in networking, that I knew people and I was able to get connected with them. And I kind of just not necessarily reached out to say, hey, could you help me, get booked kind of thing. It was just more like, oh, we know who she is. We recognize her. They could even kind of vouch for me. And I think that went a long way.
Yeah, networking usually does go a long way in wrestling. It's something that I'm learning, as I find my way. Like that really does help a lot of the time when you want to branch out and try new things in wrestling. So that's really cool. So did you ever, before you got into wrestling professionally, did you ever imagine yourself, doing this type of work?
No. I mean, I guess when I was little, I would always admire more of the speaking role. So like as a kid, I loved listening to JR. Like just the way he told stories and matches was like, man, that's so cool. And I guess I always thought like that would be a cool thing to ever do. But never did I ever put two and two together to say, hey, one day I'm going to be a ring announcer. I'm going to be a commentator. I'm going to be an interviewer. Like never did that cross my mind. And I think it was because I really didn't know or understand about independent wrestling probably until I was an adult, until I was living in New Mexico and I found Destiny Wrestling. That was honestly my first exposure to independent wrestling. So to know that you could do that on the independent wrestling level, like, was like a game changer for me, because I had only known the big companies, your, WCWs, your WWEs, even Impact, like those were the things that's all I knew. So to find out like you could do that at a local level was like, okay, I mean, what's the harm in it? Like I knew enough to be dangerous, but also maybe not enough to know what I was getting into. But no, I think I admired people, but never did I think this would be something that I would do and that I'm still doing right now.
Yeah, that's kind of how it is for me. Like I never imagined it either. So it's just kind of like, I would see other people do it, but then I'd just be like, that's cool. I wonder, how amazing that would be.
Yeah.
But then it wouldn't be at the forefront of my mind as something that I would have done with my life. But somehow, stuff happens and then you're here and and you start saying things and people start listening and then people are even more interested. And so you branch out for opportunities and there you are. And, it's stunning how quickly it can happen. So it looks like that's basically the same thing that happened to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything was just one step at a time. One thing led to another, that led to another, that led to another. And it's always just kind of slowly just moving on to almost like a frog in lily pads, like just jumping to the next lily pad, I would say. And some of it, it is different because I think a ladder is more this progression up. And I have to be honest, sometimes I don't always know if I'm necessarily moving up, but I like to branch out. And then it isn't until you get to that next step when you realize, oh, this is the next step. Sometimes it's very obvious when you're in the next step, but other times you don't realize you're at the next step until you're there and you're like, oh, wow, this is this is different, or this is a big deal, or this is, something really special.
Definitely. So, how would you say you've adapted, to the independent wrestling scene? Because you did talk about how it was new, for you in the sense that you didn't know that much about it, which is kind of how I started out as well. You get exposed to wrestling on the mainstream level, but then you don't necessarily know exactly how to, you don't really know exactly what the independent scene is until you get in it, and then you see that it's just as big and thriving, as the mainstream. It just doesn't have like the major platform to be everywhere at the same time, even though stuff is changing. So how have you adapted, to becoming a part of the independent scene?
That's a good question. As I think about it, a few things come to mind. One is because I was in Albuquerque when I started, there's some cities that have a very vibrant independent wrestling scene where there's multiple promotions happening, or a state where you have promotions, all over the place. New Mexico was one where at the time, Destiny Wrestling was the only promotion in the entire state that was running. Wow. So my only other point of reference for independent wrestling was things I would see outside of the state. So I did kind of a few things. One was take out my trusty old Fight TV app, and I started to watch videos of promotions on Fight TV. That's how I got familiar with like championship wrestling from Hollywood, which then I became like obsessed with because I loved the storytelling. I loved the matches. And I started to get an understanding too for independent wrestling, but also on the TV level, how different that looks like and how you have to tell stories differently in that format compared to, a larger format like WWE. And then also going to shows. So when I would come and visit Arizona, I would then go to Championship Wrestling from Arizona and other local promotions and really make that opportunity to visit a promotion just as a fan, to watch and observe and see what it's like from that fan perspective. Because at the end of the day, that's promotions are very focused on, their fan base and building matches and stories to bring fans in. And so knowing what's happening on that side, I think made me a lot more knowledgeable about just independent wrestling, but also helped me as an interviewer and as an announcer. Because ultimately what I'm trying to do is help tell a story to that larger audience. But sometimes you need to be part of that audience to know, what is it, how are they going to receive it? What do they need to know? What is the emotion or tone that you have to convey? So yeah, I would say it was a mix of everything between, watching videos and becoming fans of promotions outside of my state to actually going to shows to watch and observe, and also just be a fan. I love being a wrestling fan. Some of my favorite nights are when I don't have to announce anything and I can just sit there and watch a show.
Yes, those are some of my favorite times too, in the moments where you don't really have a whole lot of assignments tied to it and you can just watch it. Because I actually had that experience this past Friday because SmackDown was in Birmingham. Yeah. And me and my boyfriend went, and I was trying to turn it into an assignment, which I guess is something that a lot of us, struggle with.
I've also done that as well.
Especially if you're new. So, right. So I was trying to turn it into an assignment, but he was telling me, like, Stephanie, this is like the first live event that's happened here in 2 years. Like, why don't you just go and just enjoy it? Yeah. And that was probably the best decision he helped me make, but it was the best decision I made, because getting into it and watching it happen, it's one thing to watch it on TV, and then it's also another thing to commentate for it, because there's a sense of there's a different focus that you have to have. You're locked in, but then when you're watching it as a fan, it sort of reminds you of the energy that you brought to it in the first place and what you love about it the most. And being reminded of that, especially now during WrestleMania season as well, was a beautiful thing. Yeah. So I also find that, participating in the independents and actually watching independent shows, is really cool. Like, I started doing that 2 years ago when I started my show, and I would watch matches for people, as research for different wrestlers, and then I would watch it and I was like, man, this is actually kind of cool. Yeah. Like, where have I been?
Yes. Yeah, it's just a different environment. I almost relate it to like college sports, because I wasn't, or actually my fascination with football started when I was in high school and I was part of the marching band and I had to sit there and watch football. And I actually started to get interested in it. And then when I went to college, to be part of, a group or being part of a school that had, a big presence, just the actual environment, college game day was so exciting, but you just felt so connected with your school and the pride that it brings, I would say that was kind of the closest comparison. Being in independent wrestling, like, you are truly part of the experience, and it cuts close to home, like there's fans in the crowds and you could hear what they're saying, and they get truly invested in the people that are there, and the wrestlers get to interact with fans in ways that you don't necessarily get to do when you have 10,000 people there. It's such a really intimate and unique experience, and it almost feels like, a promotion can feel like a college sports team, and you're keeping up with all the things that are happening in there, but you're also very attached. There's people who are very, feel very strongly about, their home promotions or their favorite promotions, because of the fact that it's almost like, someone who's just cheering on a professional sports team.
Yeah, and then it's like the more attached you become to that independent promotion and then to the wrestlers there, the more you become invested in their growth, and then
Yes.
you get excited to see how the promotion grows, and you get excited to see so many of your favorite wrestlers, go to different places and get, greater opportunity. And it is so cool to actually see stuff like that, because you remember, where they once were, and then all of a sudden they grow and then they get to this bigger place, and you're just like, I remember them when they
Yes, that
like, it's
yes.
the coolest thing.
It is the coolest thing. It is one of the coolest things to ever see when you've worked with someone or seen someone and they get a big opportunity. They get signed, they get a championship, and it's like, damn, like, I'm so happy, I'm so excited for you, because you've seen the work that they put into it, and especially when it's just someone that you really enjoy working with, or someone that you just feel like, man, you're just a good person, and they get to that next level, you're just so thrilled for, like, damn, like, good things can really happen to good people, and I've seen that a few times, and that's like super, super cool.
It really is. So did you have like a mentor to kind of help guide you through when you first started?
No, no, I was very much thrown into, not the deep, deep end, but I was very much thrown into it. I actually reconnected with one of the guys who helped bring me into Destiny Wrestling, back in Albuquerque. He came to visit a few weeks ago, and we were just kind of chatting and catching up, and we were talking about it. When I started, I literally came to one of their shows that night, and they handed me a microphone and said, okay, here's your list of interviews that you're going to do. And same thing, I did that for a while, and then for announcing, they did slow me into, kind of slowly get me into that. And for announcing, I would say I had some really great mentors that did help me and learn along the way. Adam Merrick, who was part of Destiny Wrestling Organization, he was the commissioner and ring announcer, and so I had to work a lot with him to learn what to announce and how to announce. But they also gave me a lot of freedom to be like, what, do it however you want to do it. Also in Arizona, when I started at Arizona Wrestling Federation, John Wolfgang, he was the first announcer I really was able to talk with and learn from and observe and get that advice. And he's an incredibly talented performer in general. He's now moved on to be a wrestler, and I see how his analytical mind works as an announcer and how he's utilizing that as a wrestler. But someone who was always very professional, and someone that I knew I could ask questions to and get that feedback from. And even, one of my best friends, Greg DeMarco, he's my friend, but I absolutely have considered him a mentor as well, both in podcasting and announcing and interviewing. He has such a sharp, keen mind for wrestling, and he also when working in IZW specifically has put me in situations where he knows I could showcase my talent as an interviewer, an announcer, and even, recording and doing some of that backstage production work. And so he is also someone who I is my friend, but also someone that I've been able to rely on and get a lot of great feedback and advice from.
Yeah, it's always good to have people to talk to, especially when you feel like, you might be messing up somewhere, or you feel like, you have a question about a certain thing. It is so good to know that you sort of have like a community of people that you can ask questions to. Like for me, I know I have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to that. It's like there's you, there's Tyron, there's Derek, there's the Jobber Tears podcast crew.
Yes.
Like it's just, and then everyone I work with Women's Wrestling Talk, because they all have their own platforms as well. Like it's just it's like it's too much. It's like you're spoiled. But it's so good to have that support system in a sense, because you just don't want to feel like you're out there by yourself figuring everything else, out on your own. So
yeah. And I've always appreciated, like, people don't have to do that. That's one thing in wrestling. They don't have to. Nobody has to do anything. And wrestling is so rich in tradition and this concept of paying it forward, whether it's, mentorship, like we even just talked about at the beginning of the show, someone like Scott Hall, who paid it forward in giving advice and feedback to younger talent, to even the way that he carried himself in the independent circuit and scene, to people within wrestling communities, podcast communities, who take the time to just share advice and tips and, feedback. Like nobody has to do anything, but they do it because they want to see you grow. They want to see the industry grow. They want to see a promotion grow. And that's how it is. And that's how I think it will continue to be. We live in a time now where people talk about the stories from the 90s and 80s and even back in the 70s, and all of that storytelling and tradition has passed on to now. And I think there's something to be said about how that's, how that will continue to grow wrestling into the next 50 years.
Definitely. So would you say that you have a strong fan base in the independent scene?
I would say I have some really amazing fans. I love when I come out in the stage and, fans are cheering for Miranda. Like, it happens. I try not to put too much of myself in the spotlight when it comes to that, because the focus is on the wrestlers and other things. But I have a really great fan base out in Arizona and New Mexico and even in Las Vegas, where I am out sometimes too. So it's really cool to see those things. And, when you just go to a scene or to a show and people know who you are or recognize you, like that's pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, like I imagine that has to be cool. And the fact that people, really resonate with who you are, and then people actually like you. Like I imagine it has to be amazing.
Yeah, it's a good feeling, especially, anytime I get to interact with kids. Like those have been some of my favorite memories. I remember in Las Vegas at FSW a few months ago, there was these two girls there. I think they were with their dad and they were watching, and they were asking me all these, just questions and how are you? And I had this pretty pink pen with a jewel on top, and I said, look, I need this for the night, but as soon as I'm done with it, I'm going to hand it to you guys so you could keep it. And they were just so happy just that I gave them that pen, and so it's little things like that that make me just really grateful for where I'm at and who I get to work with.
Oh my God, that's so cute.
Yes, that made me think like maybe I should just carry cute pens around all the time and give them to kids. Maybe that's my own gimmick. Bret Hart had the sunglasses. Maybe I have cute pens.
Yes, that should be your thing. I'm definitely a supporter of that being your thing. That would be so cool if you did that, like for like every child.
Right. I'll put it in the Amazon order right after this.
Yes. So, what has been the wildest backstage interview that you've ever done?
Wait, repeat that.
The wildest backstage.
Oh, the wildest
that you've ever had.
Oh man, these
or
are
any
fun.
crazy interaction?
Yeah, gosh. I've had some very interesting interactions. Again, starting with Destiny Wrestling, like they threw me for a loop in the very beginning. I had a very interesting interaction with one of their biggest heels at the time, Johnny K. And from the moment, I mean, I still have it on my Facebook, but the very first interview I did was Johnny, and Johnny's a very unhinged, unpredictable character. And to the point where my interview colleague, who's much bigger and experienced than me, pretty much handed off the mic and said, "I'm not doing this. Here you go, Miranda." I was like, I had no idea what I was getting into. Very creepy, very just intimidating. And I would say like that was literally my first interview, and that set the tone for what I was going to expect in the future. And sure enough, we even had some interactions in the ring. One time he had this baby doll, who was his sidekick baby, aptly named, and she was stolen. And so he was going around the crowd asking people where baby was, if they had seen baby. And he made his way into the ring while I was announcing and confronted me, asking me if I knew where baby was. And he just, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where baby was. I had no idea. And I was just trying to do my job, and I was so spooked. And so, it was always a very interesting, somewhat special dynamic I had with Johnny K. It always kind of, freaked me out. When all you're doing there is trying to do your job, and someone's at a whole different universe than you are in, that you had to just be like, man, you're a super creepy dude. Thank you though. Thank you for this shit. Like I don't know what to say, and I have to admit the crowd loved it. The crowd loved how uncomfortable that I felt. And I think that's something, a testament to what we like to see as fans. We like to see emotion. We like to see conflict. We like to see drama. And so, I would also say more recently, I had a very interesting interaction at Phoenix Championship Wrestling this past Saturday. There is some tension, to say the least, between two of our biggest names, Dom Vitale and Joe Graves. And Joe Graves specifically wanted to fight Dom. And Dom and Joe have been friends for years. And Dom said, "No, I'm not going to fight you." Also at that time, Joe put out some information about, Dom's life that eventually led to me and letting the crowd know about our relationship. And that's how we kind of got outed, where Joe brought me into the ring and sat me in front of Dom while he was handcuffed to say, "If you're not going to fight me, I'm going to bring your fiance into this ring until you do." So that was something where I never thought I would be in a situation like that. But there you are, where, one, you're now somehow caught in the middle of this, feud between two people. And it really wasn't a feud between two people, because Dom was very adamant that he didn't want to fight Joe. But you get brought into it and literally, kind of held a bit hostage. So that's a very interesting situation that I never thought that I would be a part of, just because I always keep my things separate, my worlds apart, but at that moment they all crashed together all at once.
Oh my gosh, girl.
that was my Saturday night. I have to tell you, it was a long night. It was a long night, but it's something that when you get into this, where your worlds start to kind of come into play together, I guess it tends, one way, shape, or form will come to light, like I think that was my big realization. And sometimes, people try and utilize your role to prove a point. I think that's very true of announcers and interviewers. When we see their interactions with wrestlers, sometimes you are part of the example that they're trying to make. So, there's always been a little bit of a hazard, but this past Saturday was a pretty new turn for me at Phoenix Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, that sounds pretty juicy there. Like, that sounds like some major, like, drama, like, from a reality show, like, type stuff.
Yeah, here we, it was crazy. Yes, yeah, it was pretty insane how it all came about, and again, it was being put in a situation where, you were used as leverage, and no one loves being used as leverage. But you push people to a point, and Dom in particular is not the type of person who will, be pushed to a point and back down. So friendships are super important to him. The people that he cares about and trust are super important. But when you cross a line, especially the people that he cares about, there's no coming back. And sometimes the best enemies come from being best friends. And I think that, it's leading to a big matchup that they have on May 14th out here in Phoenix. But, it's some very much reality storylines.
Yeah, that just sounds absolutely dramatic. But the thing about wrestling is the fact that when it comes to wrestling, it feels like it's one of those things where if you're in the business, everything, like, there's nothing that's off limits there. Like, there's absolutely nothing in wrestling that's off limits. Like, you get brought into stuff, you get knocked down sometimes. People bring up your life and all the stuff that you've got going on as if it has anything to do with what's going on in the ring, or it could have something to do with what's going on in the ring. It's just a lot. It's just really dramatic. But that's the thing about wrestling. It's like, it's not like any other sport where if somebody brings some personal stuff and you get sent away, or you get called away by a referee or something, or, ejected from a game. Like, wrestling is no holds barred that way.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you can.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm so glad that you were able to keep a level head, as much as you could, and handle it, as best as you could. So, like, I believe in you.
Thank you. Well, I didn't have much of a choice. I still, went through with the rest of the night, and I'm very, fortunate to have someone who's, willing to defend me. But I've always been very adamant that I never wanted to be in that part of the spotlight. Like, I always wanted to keep, a professional tone and keep those things out. But I think, just like I mentioned before, sometimes you get forced to be brought in for one reason or another. And, you just have to do your best to keep cool.
Yeah, you do. So what exactly, was your decision-making process like when you decided to branch out and become a podcast host?
There wasn't a whole lot of decision making. It was kind of like with wrestling. It was something that I did once and I liked it and I just kept doing it. Like, that was one thing when I was talking with Dax a few weeks ago. He was like, yeah, she just kept showing up to shows, so we let her work. And that's kind of how it, and literally Greg will say the same thing with my adventures in podcasting is, oh, she just kept coming to, kept logging in every week and we just recorded a podcast with her. But I would say it started off with Greg. We met at an independent promotion in Phoenix that he was helping to run, and he'd been podcasting for quite some time before then, for about 7 years. And one day he said, hey, do you want to be a guest on the podcast, the Greg DeMarco Show? And I said, sure. And it was my very first podcast experience, and I loved it. I thought it was great. And then I came back again. He said, hey, if you ever want to come back. And I just did. I did that for pretty much now going on, oh my gosh, is it 3 years already? Oh my gosh, I don't even remember, about 2.5, maybe 3 years. And just kept doing it. And then that expanded into, we were literally at the Royal Rumble here in Phoenix. And he's like, do you want to do your own podcast? I said, sure, why not? And so that's how the hashtag Miranda Show was born, was just more of our random thoughts and conversations as friends that we just put out there into the podcast sphere. And then it really got to be more serious when I connected with Lucha Central, and they were launching the Lucha Central podcast network, and they needed a co-host for the Lucha Central weekly podcast. That was really like, okay, this is something big. This is actually, more than just podcasting with my friends. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that was definitely the moment of like, okay, this could be something. This could be something more than just, just being random with my best friends. This could be actually something a lot more, poignant and a lot more purposeful.
Yeah. So basically, you were just game to it, and you were just showing up and being that girl, and then that's how it started.
Yep. Yeah, and I met so many amazing people through podcasting as well. Of course, you, as you mentioned, Ty Asbury, Derek, so many people. Najir Chambers from Big Gold Belt Media. He's definitely someone that I've looked at as a mentor and a friend. And going more into that media side, I've learned a lot from him about how he approaches wrestling news and wrestling interviews, because he has such a unique perspective, both from a wrestling fan point of view, but also understanding entertainment. He's done pressers for Comic Cons, for Disney, for Showtime. He has such a wealth of experience in entertainment, but he's also such a knowledgeable, down-to-earth wrestling fan. And he just is able to kind of connect all of those dots together and really put in some amazing interviews and amazing content. And so podcasting has really helped me just learn from a lot of other people on the other side of wrestling, not just the fan side, not just the independent wrestling side, but then kind of on the media side too.
Yeah, that's definitely what podcasting has done for me, in a sense. Like, it's like a crash course in media, while also getting a crash course in wrestling and learning things that you probably never would have known just as a fan. So I'm glad that you were able to have those experiences and learn from them. So who has been your favorite guest on any one of your podcasts, on Lucha Central or either one of them?
Oh, so good. I want to say, like, literally one of my favorites has been Lince Dorado. We interviewed him back May of 2020 when WWE partnered with Urban Aztec to launch a Lucha House Party shirt. Very, very cool design. And we were able to snag him for an interview, and still active with WWE. Like, it was a, oh my gosh moment to be able to interview, an active WWE superstar, but also someone who I've admired just in, again, who Lucha House Party is and their fun representation of Latinos, someone who's Puerto Rican like I am. Like, there was just so many stack on stacks that I loved. And he was just so easy to talk to, someone who was just so appreciative of just, the world of wrestling and his journey. And one thing I do for my Lucha Central weekly podcasts when I interview someone is I kind of come up with a very grandiose introduction. I talk about their accolades and highlights and try and give a little buffer to our listeners about who they are and why are they a big deal. And after I did for his, he just was like, this is a great intro. I want you to intro me all the time. And like, there was that part of me that just squealed. I'm pretty sure I squealed on the actual interview, but I was just so stoked for that. To have someone, really like that introduction. But he was a really great interview. And then someone more recently that we interviewed that I really, really enjoyed was Major League Wrestling's Gino Medina. And I think it was more because he was so surprised on how we did our research to how well versed we were with, his career and family background. One of my favorite things to do is kind of surprise people when they talk with us, because they kind of can go in with the preconceived notion of like, oh, what is this interview going to be like? What are you going to ask me? Kind of the same questions. But when you do your time to research and learn more about someone and you come from a different angle, you can catch them by surprise. And I love to kind of catch people by surprise by the types of questions that we ask and the things that we know. And he was just, someone who I think too is incredibly young and talented, versatile, someone that you really can see big things from, but also he is very, dedicated and hardworking to the world of wrestling, and someone that I could, again, see further down the road, have a big name for himself. But I would say that it was just fun to kind of catch him off guard, to be like, oh, wow, you guys are asking good questions and you guys are, know more about me than I thought. And that's, to me, that's always a kind of a fun interview.
Yeah, I find that sometimes the best interviews come when you come with a level of preparedness.
Mm-hmm.
So I really admire that, that you guys were able to dig deep, in his background and then be able to actually apply that, because sometimes I imagine that some of these people be doing interviews like a whole lot and then they kind of find them tiresome, but then once they run up on somebody that actually cares and actually takes the time to get to know them, even before they talk to them and even during the time of which they're talking to them, it makes them feel like special.
Yeah. And again, you can always come prepared and then the interview go a different direction. Having that flexibility is always important. But yeah, doing that research, even, again, like I said, my big things are, I do the Lucha Central Weekly podcast interviews with Brendan Barr and Dusty Murphy, and I feel really fortunate to be part of a trio as a team because we all bring something different to the table. And so we all collectively work together to come up with questions and research. And we all come in with our strengths. And again, my big thing is that intro. So I use that research to develop that intro. And I think that is usually the first of like, oh, so this is going to be different, because from the first time I even, say my first line, that's kind of an indicator of like, okay, so you've done some research, you know who you're talking to, and then paired with Dusty and Brendan, who have such a wealth of lucha libre knowledge. They are so great about kind of digging and getting some of that great information and tidbits that they can then turn into questions. And again, we all work and rely on each other for those things, and we've come up with a really good system and pattern of just talking and helping each other out. But also, again, when the time calls for it, a follow-up question or something happens, like we really are able to just kind of all join in collectively and have a good flow with, I think, really great questions and conversation.
Okay, team, I see you.
It's a team effort, whether it's in front of the camera, behind the camera. Surrounding yourself with a good team is, a game changer.
Definitely. So as a woman who wears, many different hats in the world of wrestling, do you take pride in all of these skills? And do you and where exactly do you see women having more representation in terms of doing behind the scenes stuff and not just athletic stuff?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I do feel like there's such a place for women in all aspects of wrestling. I think one that we're starting to see grow more and deservingly so is in this podcasting world. I've told you off screen, but also on, about how for me, I don't have a lot of female friends who are into wrestling. And so anytime I'd hear a podcast or see a video hosted by a woman, it made me feel more connected. Like I could have a friend to talk to, or like I could have a conversation with someone about wrestling as a female. Because I think when you are coming in from a different perspective, it makes conversation that much more interesting. But at the end of the day, I'd like to talk with my friends just about Grey's Anatomy than I would about wrestling. Or I want to talk just about, with, How I Met Your Father just as much as I want to talk about wrestling, And like, I think some of those other things are a lot easier to talk about than wrestling. And so podcasts and media have always been something where I love to see more women involvement. But even in that production role, and even promoter role. It's very, very rare to have women as promoters, and in production roles and running behind the scenes and backstage. But I do feel like they bring a different perspective to that. One that I think could be unique to fans and unique to promotions. I do think that women can have just as much knowledge and passion about wrestling as men do, and can utilize that the same way that men do in those producer promoter roles. I also feel like when that happens, they are more in tune with how to write and structure women, in the setting, whether it's a match, whether it's a storyline. They're more than able to really put women in situations that are a lot more realistic and fans can get into, where I think maybe sometimes there's a disconnect in how to book women from other perspectives. And not to say everyone, and not to say there isn't great, men out there who know how to book women's matches and women's storylines. Like, that's not the case. There's absolutely that do. But I think when we talk about, things that could look different and unique and pretty innovative, I think that could be such a amazing role to see more women in.
Yes, I agree with all of that, because I find that the deeper I grow into the wrestling landscape, I always had a desire for this, but I gain an even deeper desire to see women have more of a say so in wrestling, outside of just being the athletes. Like, even with camera work, and even with, of course, being commentators and telling the story from the female perspective. Like, we basically help drive this fandom. So if we help drive this fandom, then how come wrestling should reflect that?
Yeah.
And it should look like that, in all aspects. And of course, you have so many different female promotions, like the Belladonna division, which I work for, and then just like Destiny, like you worked for. Like, there's just so many female promotions, but I feel like it's only gonna grow and get better as the world continues to evolve. And once we have more of control over all of our stories in terms of wrestling, it's only gonna get greater from there.
Yeah, I agree. And someone who I've really admired here in the state of Arizona, as helps run Impact Zone Wrestling IZW with Greg, who's been an agent, who's helped book, is Crazy Hot Morgan, or Michelle, as we call her. She has been a wrestler now for many years. She's really a pillar of women's wrestling out here in the Southwest. And she's just someone who, when I think of like the supporter of women's wrestling and women in general, like, she is one of the biggest champions I have ever seen of women. She will do, what she can to help people grow. She supports people. She gives feedback. She gives opportunities, and like, she is very much kind of to a mom to a lot of us and like, I don't have a wrestling mom. I feel like she is part of my wrestling mom, my wrestling family, because she has been someone who has helped me with opportunities, helped me with growth, helped me just like with visualizing things. And she's so smart, and I don't know where I would be without Morgan. Like, I just feel like having someone in your corner, but also someone just keeping an eye out for you, like, sometimes she's never necessarily too close, but she's just close enough to keep a peripheral out, It's amazing to have that support. And again, as a woman, like, she wears so many hats. It's so well appreciated by someone like me.
Yes, and that's really great that you have someone like that who wears all the hats that you can look up to, and someone who actually cares enough to look after you in that way.
Yeah. No, it's very fortunate. I'm very fortunate. Like you said, I'm embarrassingly fortunate with, the support that I have.
Yes. So we're going to drift away from wrestling a little bit and talk about something like things that you enjoy doing outside of it. So, do you have any favorite TV shows, or do you have any other hobbies that you have outside of wrestling that you really enjoy?
My face was a little shocked by there because I'm like, wow, I don't know what I do. A lot of what I do is around wrestling, but I would say that a show that I've been very much into is the How I Met Your Mother, How I Met Your Father series. So here there's a local channel that will air reruns every night, and I started to pick that up about a year ago. So I didn't watch it when it was active, but I've started to watch it as reruns, and I've been pretty obsessed with it. And now with the new series on Hulu with How I Met Your Father, I've been watching each one of those as well. Like I think it's a really funny series. You know, it's something that, you know, it, in the afterthought of it, I know there was a lot of fans who didn't like aspects of it too, so I could see it from that perspective. But I'm really digging the new How I Met Your Father. Like I watch it every week, and so I'm super stoked. I can't believe season 1 is already done. I need season 2 already. And then another show that I watch a lot, all the seasons, and this is mainly because I feel like it's very close to my life, is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel from Amazon. It is about a female comic in the 1950s who, you know, got into comedy by accident, and especially from these unfortunate life events and her journey to stardom as a female comic, and all of the challenges she has with her family, especially her parents, the time it was for women in the 50s to do anything outside of the house, as a mother, you know, like there was just so many aspects of that show that hit me personally, because I felt like that was a lot of my life as an announcer. Like the same disapproval that her family gives her for being a comedian, I feel like my parents look at me the same way as, you know, in wrestling. They're like, what do you do? Why? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, you shouldn't be doing this as a woman, you know? Like, I just have watched hours of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel just as a cathartic experience to be like, okay, so this is what it's like when you try and go for, you know, your dreams and something that you want to do, and kind of really the uphill battles that you have in that. So I've just loved that correlation. Other than that too, I'm a big fan of football. So I'm very sad that football's gone, because that would be a Sunday ritual to watch football on ours. But also same thing with college football. They're definitely big football fans. So when the season's in, you will definitely be watching me or finding me watching football, or having it in the background or on the ESPN app, just kind of keeping up with the stats.
Yeah, I love watching college football myself. Like, actually, because it's like, I don't know, I just don't like the NFL. And I'm sorry to anybody who's watching and, you know, they love the NFL, but the NFL just doesn't hit like college football does.
Yeah, exactly.
And then especially if you're in the South over here in Alabama.
I was gonna say, yeah, like, so you are in a college football mecca there, where it is truly a way of life. It truly is a way of life. Like, the SEC is nothing to play with.
We're just not. And it's just, and even though I'm not necessarily a fan of really any team in the SEC, it's still exciting to watch. Like, it's hard to not get into it, because we stop everything for football, for Alabama football. So you can't help but just, you know, sit there and look at it and be enthralled to a certain degree. It's fun. It's really fun. And it can be really addictive at times, but I love it though. And then, you know, with those TV shows, it's like, I've seen so many people praise The Marvelous Miss Maisel so much, and it looks good, but it's just like, I just don't need another streaming service, Miranda. I just don't. Like,
that's true. I only have it because I have Amazon Prime, so that's the only reason. And that's really the only thing I watch on Amazon Video is you know, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. So if it wasn't for the fact that I use Amazon Prime so much to order stuff, then I probably wouldn't have it. But, you know, so it's by happenstance. But I get that too, you know, like, between literally the other thing that is on my TV that I watch all the time, even in the background, is on Peacock, is, you know, old episodes of Nitro. Like, that is how my house goes, is old episodes of Nitro in the meantime. Or old, gosh, super old episodes of, you know, WWF superstars or stuff like that, you know? So, but even then, I, with Peacock, watched the new, the reboot of Saved by the Bell, you know, and those 2 seasons. And so, you know, when you have a streaming service, like, it definitely, you find the things that, like, will, you know, kind of creep in, or just like, you'll be like, huh, this looks interesting. And then like 5 hours later, you're like, oh, I just watched the whole season, or the, you know, I'm halfway done through season 1 or something like that. So it's kind of, sometimes I think they're happy accidents, but yeah, I would say The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, just, I think for any woman who struggles in an industry or a world where you are viewed differently, you have, you know, tougher challenges, and maybe something that's very unorthodox. Like I said, you know, it's based in the 1950s. So for a woman to go into comedy at that time was very different compared to, you know, maybe they're a singer or an actress, and not just a comedian, but like a more vulgar comedian, you know, like, so many parallels with wrestling that it just hits straight to home for me every time that I watch it.
Yeah, it sounds really good. And what's so funny is, like, I kind of dealt with a little bit of that before I even started doing wrestling stuff. And that kind of just teaches you the lesson that you just can't tell all of your big goals and all your dreams to everybody. Like, you just, like, there's just something that some stuff that you really do just have to keep to yourself.
Yeah.
Because you know what it means to you, and that's really all it has to be in order to keep it and the joy that you have for yourself. And if there are other people who don't understand, then, well, that's their problem. So I mean, I hate to say it like that, but, and be that blunt, but that's really, like, that's their problem. So I'm glad that you know, are learning to rise above that, and just do you in the best way that you do you. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you're left with yourself. So you have to live for yourself and be true to the things that you love, regardless of what anyone says about it. So that's just my 2 cents on that part. But that does sound interesting. I haven't been watching any TV shows lately. Like, I just haven't. Like, I just fell out with a lot of the shows that I used to love. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Like, I know Grey's Anatomy just came back, but I don't tend to watch it. Yeah, because I record on Thursday nights, and so that's been kind of a bummer. And I don't have cable, so again, anything I have is from my antenna and streaming services. So I have a very limited amount of things that I do watch. But like I said, at least there's a handful of shows or things that I, you know, make a point to watch. But to be honest, like, at least 50% of the time there is something more wrestling related on. I'm just that's usually part of the week, is something wrestling, and then you sprinkle some other shows and things here and there.
Definitely. So what do you think about the state of wrestling as a whole right about now? What do you think is really good, and what can be improved upon, in your opinion?
Wow, that's a really good question. You know, I think it's a big time of growth. It's a big boom period. You have, of course, WWE and AEW. You still also have other promotions like Major League Wrestling, Impact Wrestling, and even some of the bigger independents like GCW, you know, like, and then kind of all the tiers, you know, from there as well. It sounds like there's just so much opportunity for people all over the U.S. And I do feel like we're back in a boom period after the decline that we saw with the pandemic. It's great to see wrestling in this new era, this post-pandemic era. And I feel like A lot of people have taken the lessons that they've learned from the pandemic era to now, and are working hard to bring wrestling back to their local communities, and within their state. And here in Arizona, we've definitely had a boom where we're starting to see promotions, pick back up again, and even, expand. And then also on the national level, you have, a promotion like GCW, who is now, hitting places all over the U.S. and is kind of growing to be the super indie. And then you also have these strategic signings, and people getting signed everywhere. I still am such a big fan of Impact Wrestling because I feel like they have such a unique pulse and eyes out there where they're signing really great talent. And not just people, maybe from WWE, but like really all over the independent scene. And they're giving them a great place to work. And I'm such a big fan and advocate of Impact Wrestling still. People have their, thoughts about it. I don't think TNA has ever left some people's minds, but that's neither here nor there. So I do feel that. I mean, I feel like as far as growth, it's hard to say, because what I may say, is something that's a room for growth or could be improved somewhat, it may be done somewhere that I don't know and I can't see, and they're doing it well. Of course, opportunities and spotlight for women, I think, is really important. And as you talked about, in a different roles too, not just, as interviewers or even announcers, but as referees, as commentators, as producers. I do feel like having a wider range of talented women in different roles can really strengthen a promotion and strengthen a company as well. I do see this interesting shift, and this is a lot more recent with the WWE too, where we talk about college sports, WWE going into the world of college athletes and recruiting them to be the next classes, or part of the next classes for NXT, for, building that future. And I think it's a very unique perspective as someone who likes college sports and admires college athletes. I think that this is an interesting way to bring a new fan base into wrestling, but also kind of look at the pipeline a little differently. And I know it's been somewhat of a controversial view, because there's always been this reliance on independent wrestlers being, the next group that kind of comes up. But in understanding what the WWE is, it's a form of entertainment. Wrestling may be the method of how they do it, but they're focusing on entertainment and at the athleticism behind it. And what better way to kind of find the athlete first and then build them into an entertainer? Because vice versa doesn't necessarily always work. So I think that's a very interesting aspect now, where it also seems like AEW has made it very clear that that's not a direction they're going to go in, that they're going to really keep their eye more on the independent scene pulse. And not to say completely that WWE is moving away from the independent scene. We saw just in their newest signing class today that they are still going to look at and recruit independent wrestlers, but right. That perspective has changed so much, and who they're looking at changes so much. And I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. Again, I think it's almost becoming more mainstream for college athletes then to have another option after graduating, outside of the major sports entities like the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA. There's not a lot of opportunities for college athletes once they finish their college career. So to be able to continue to be an athlete at a different level in a different world, to me is fascinating. To me, it's very interesting. To me, it's actually something good for college athletes to go into, because a lot of athletes do talk about what happens with their life after they leave college and sports, and it feels like a big gap. But to be able to transfer those skills into something that's athletic and still on a bigger stage, I think could morally and mentally and emotionally be great for them. on top of, again, being a creative outlet. So I think that may be some controversial for some people, but to me, I think it's actually a great movement forward.
I absolutely agree with you, because it's just the way that wrestling is evolving now. It's evolving in such a diverse way that I had never thought of and never thought I would ever see.
Yeah.
And I actually appreciate it, in some cases, that it is growing in a healthier way where people are having more options on what they want to do and where they want to go.
Yes.
And I believe that's ultimately like the best option for people, because everybody isn't meant to just go, specifically towards one place, whether it be inside of wrestling or outside of wrestling. So if anybody can find a place where they, that ticks their boxes and where they can belong ultimately and have a sense of purpose there, then ultimately that's the most important thing. Yeah. So I 100% agree with you at all. Like, it may be controversial to say, but at the same time, it's not as controversial either, because it's a pretty healthy alternative to have. That opens up a new world to, a newer generation of athletes that are well-rounded. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Also, congratulations to those class members, because that was cool.
Yeah, it's cool. Like, cool, it's almost, like, I think now that's a big thing, when they have these tryouts for, college athletes, like, just to have them have a bigger pipeline for them, and all athletes, they could recruit, football players and cheerleaders and gymnasts and, basketball players, it just opens up for athletes, track and field, for a wider range too. So especially for female athletes, when there's not as many professional opportunities after college as there are for men, again, like, that could be the way that we start to see the world expand for women in wrestling, is the recruitment of female athletes from all of these different sectors.
100%, definitely. So, only a few more questions left. What do you think about the state of women's wrestling as a whole?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I was talking about Impact Wrestling, they really do have one of my favorite women's divisions in all of professional wrestling. Yeah. I fell in love with Impact Wrestling, the Knockouts division, around 2019, 2020, and even through the pandemic era, seeing that they had a much more, they say a lean roster, smaller amount of women in the Knockouts division, but really great matches, really entertaining storylines. And again, they really plucked people from the independent scene that made sense. Like we see now, Tasha Steelz, the new Knockouts champion. When she first came to Impact, she was part of, a tag team too with Kiera Hogan, and they helped compete for that first, the resurgence of the Knockouts tag team titles. And I just thought they were such a great, entertaining team. Rosemary and Havoc as well. Rosemary herself, gosh, she is just such a fun, dark character, but also great in the ring. And so you just have all these different components that work so well. And I would say that competed at the time with NXT being one of my favorite women's divisions. And again, at the time, you just had undeniable talent. And I feel now, as there's this new change and turning over with NXT 2.0, they are now creating those new stars. But I think a lot of that women's wrestling that I got so accustomed to in NXT has gone, just because of people moving to Raw or SmackDown, or, things shuffling around. But I do feel like, again, there is a lot more focus on women's wrestling. There's still always room for growth. We're still at a place where, there's a handful of women's matches for every, group of men's matches. But I do feel like something like WrestleMania weekend helps reinstate that purpose, and we already know that Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair are going to main event WrestleMania Saturday, which again, like, having those main event and those spotlight opportunities at that grander scale is going to have a watershed effect down to smaller and smaller promotions. And I feel like that's what I would love to see more of, is that, you know, we usually are thinking maybe the funnel goes up, but it actually comes down, you know, and we know WWE sets the trend. It does.
Yeah.
You know, so why not utilize some of the better things that they're doing and that trickle down effect to the independent level, where you are seeing more women's matches, you know, main event, or having shows with more than just one women's matches, or just seeing a variety of women's talent, you know, or even, you know, all women's promotions, you know, the Belladonna division, Mission Pro, you know, there's definitely some out there that make, you know, women's wrestling you know, that is what they focus on. But I think finding more of that balance out there, and ultimately too hoping to inspire whoever the next generation is of wrestling. You know, I mean, there's so many kids now that look at wrestling in such a idyllic light, but I think to see hopefully so many young girls look at the female wrestlers on their television screens and think, yes, this is something that I could do, like that's the funnel as well, you know, just the growing that female fan base and letting girls know that there is a place for them in wrestling, and not just in, you know, the ring as a wrestler, but yeah, if you wanted to be a referee, if you wanted to be a commentator, if you wanted to be an announcer, if you wanted to be a producer, if you wanted to set up the ring crew, if you wanted to be a designer, you know, whatever that may be, just showing them that there's a place for them.
Absolutely. So, my last question for you is, what do you think the future holds for you?
Good question as well. I know short term, I'm very excited about some of the upcoming opportunities. I'm definitely expanding my presence and knowledge in the world of lucha libre. I will be making my debut for Pro Wrestling Revolution in California next month. It's a huge lucha libre promotion that has shows in the San Francisco and San Jose area. I attended last year as a fan and just fell in love with Pro Wrestling Revolution. So I am so excited to be a part of their announced team and getting to announce for their upcoming show in April. Also going to be going to Expo Lucha in Philadelphia in June, and that's the biggest lucha libre convention in the whole world. So I'm so excited to go there, to be a part of it, to have those experiences, because you know, lucha libre was something that I've just become more recently, you know, familiar with over the past few years, but it's such a deep history. It's so rooted in tradition. There's just so much behind it, you know, not only in the ring with some of that more flashy work, but with the family heritage, with, you know, even the structure of rudos and technicals and heel refs and trios matches and all of that. I mean, I think there's so many things from lucha libre that can definitely be adopted into the mainstream wrestling culture. And so I'm just so excited and honored to be part of it. So short term, you know, continuing with, you know, announcing, you know, continuing expanding my horizons. Long term, I think that's the big question. You know, I've been doing this much longer than I thought I would be doing this. Every show, every month, every year I do this is one more time that I thought, oh wow, I didn't think I would get to do this again. And I don't know if that's just how I think. I'm always like maybe waiting for the other shoe to drop to be like, wait, what's gonna happen next, you know? But I try not to take it for granted, because literally anything could happen, and one day you could be doing your last show and you never know. So always just being appreciative of that. And, you know, I want to continue to expand my horizons. I want to announce in more states and more promotions and more places. You know, I want to keep kind of going to that next lily pad, whatever that is. While also kind of, you know, continuing to have fun with my friends, to have fun, you know, with my colleagues, to still have it be a good time. And, you know, the moment that I stop having fun, maybe that will be the moment when I realize it's not for me. But I want to just keep jumping to the next lily pad, to the next place, and maybe a little further out, you know, a little further up, you know. Not always quite sure where the direction will take me, but I know I want to go in a direction.
That's well said. Well, thank you, Miranda, for coming on the Hardy Wrestling Podcast. So, if you will, just tell everyone where they can follow you and find you, and talk about anything else you want to put over at this moment. You can do that right now.
Yeah, you can find me on social media at the hashtag Miranda, hashtag spelled out, on Instagram and Facebook. No Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. That's why one of my nicknames is the Twitterless Heroine, because I can't. I'm sorry. It's just too much for me. But you can follow me on social media, and that's where you'll find information on what promotions I'll be at next. Also actively podcasting each and every week. I am part of the Greg DeMarco Show and my own show, the hashtag Miranda Show, at thechairshot.com, as well as part of the Lucha Central weekly podcast on luchacentral.com. Both shows do have a presence on podcast streaming platforms like Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and more. So you can look up thechairshot.com and Lucha Central Podcast Network on each one of those platforms as well, if you want to listen to shows on there. And yes, that's all of the major things. Just in general, everyone just go support your local independent wrestling, whatever that is, wherever that may be. You know, check out your local independent wrestling promotions. If you can't, you know, buy their t-shirt, follow them on social media, you know, attend their next event, share their posts. You know, there's so many ways that people can support independent wrestling, and it doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. You know, it could be anything, spreading the word out, you know, whatever it may be, telling your friends, you know, or yeah, going to a show with your friends, you know, whatever that may be. Like, that's my big takeaway. Just support independent wrestling wherever you are. It is the life source of wrestling, you know, and it's a life source for communities. It's a way for people to bond and come together. So just rep your local wrestling promotions.
Yeah, that's an amazing place to end right there. So, as usual, know that you can follow me, your girl Stephanie Hardy, on Instagram and Twitter at Queen Steph Hardy, and you can follow the Hardy Wrestling Podcast on Instagram at Hardy Wrestling Podcast, and on Twitter at Hardy WrestlePod. As always, I'm your girl Stephanie Hardy, and until next time, bye, y'all.